even if you get all the mercury away, you're continuously exposed to all kinds of things. I mean, you've got the airborne mercury coming in, you've got little bits through the food, then you've got cadmium and arsenic and lead coming in, and then you've got all the different organic toxins. You've got all of the pesticides and herbicides. You've got chlorinated organics. You've got mold-based toxins. You've got toxins from organisms that live in your GI tract if you don't have a perfect biotic flora in your GI tract. And when we talk about detoxification, you're going to see I'm not going in there with a mercury-specific gun and just shooting the mercury and nothing else. We're opening up a system that's responsible for mercury, but it's also responsible for a number of other metals and a number of other toxins, including, say, mold toxin. That's why, as a practitioner, you've probably seen a lot of people that have mercury toxicity and mold toxicity. The reason for that is the same pathways that are taking the mercury out are taking the mold toxins out. And if those pathways are down and you're exposed to both, you're going to have toxicity for both. So it's very good to go back and renew this detoxification effort. What are those levels? And before I get into all the caveats, I'll tell you I like people under 0.05 nanograms per mil for the dental form of mercury. That's when you know you're really cleaned up. And for methylmercury, that number can be a little higher. Depending upon the state of their health, I like them down below 2 nanograms per liter, or if they've shown some sensitivity to mercury, then I like them under 1 nanogram per liter. But then this brings up the whole question of toxicity. Is toxicity a level of something in your body? I'll ask you that.
Well, I guess it depends on the individual.
Bingo. Toxicity is a response from the body, a negative response from the body to the presence of a certain chemical. And so the individual has different capacities in its defense system. I mean, one of the slides I show all the time is from one of the very big poisoning episodes. This was in Iraq in 1973, and they were able to measure the half-lives, or the time from peak dose to half dose in the blood across their population. Those half-lives ranged from 40 to 120 days, with a nice bell curve between 40 and 100 days, meaning you've got slower and faster detoxifiers, and then a genetic subset. There was a totally separate population added 120 days. So this represents different efficiencies of the glutathione system. And when we look at cell culture studies where they try to find individual cell cultures that are resistant to mercury, these all have fully functioning glutathione systems. And that's not glutathione levels, it's glutathione systems. That means several enzymes and transport proteins that go along with the glutathione are all functioning. When those are all functioning, you can live with, say, this level of mercury without much toxic effect. You may still want to bring that down so that over time, as that defense system weakens, you're not susceptible to the effects of the mercury. For instance, I have a lot of clients that are menopausal women because progesterone helps stimulate your detoxification abilities. And when that tanks, all of a sudden you become susceptible to that same level of mercury you were carrying for a long time. So even if you're okay, you might want to get rid of that stuff. But then say you naturally have a weak detoxification system, and that system is not just shuttling things out, it's also protecting your cellular chemistry. So now you have a weak system, and now this much mercury is giving you a hard time. So it's important to look at the test results and frame them in the context of what the symptomology of the patient is. So you can say, yeah, we definitely got to move these things way down, or we only have to move them down a little bit. Probably the biggest myth that's got to be just destroyed immediately is the body, that mercury will stay in the body until you go in there with a chemical chelator and pull it out, that mercury is never moved from the body and it just builds up forever. That is completely a myth. We'd all be dead if that were the case. you have a system for moving mercury and other heavy metals out of the body. They may work at different efficiencies for different people or may be totally disrupted in people, but you have a system. And when I came out to speak at a conference there in Schaumburg, Illinois, that was hosted by Diane Meyer, when she picked me up at the airport, I said, well, what do you want me to get across to your audience here? I mean, you've got Boyd Haley here and Hal Huggins and Lee Cowden speaking. I'm the new guy on the block. You know what I talk about. What do you want me to get across? And she said, I want you to get across to people why one person over here is completely sick from amalgam and this guy over here is totally fine. And this is the central problem we have now in toxicology today, and where we really fail and in the mainstream research, and that's this failure to understand the vast disparity amongst the population in their ability to deal with certain toxins and their ability to detoxify them. And so that's when I showed this slide from the Iraq poisoning that showed some bits of the population getting rid of that dose of mercury in 40 days, or at least getting rid of the half-life, getting rid of half of it in 40 days, and other groups taking 100 days, and then another group, totally different subset of people, taking 120 days. So what you see here is the detoxification system working at different efficiencies in different people. So what is the detoxification system? The core of the detoxification system is the glutathione system. Notice I don't say it's glutathione, it's the glutathione system. Glutathione binds to metals and can move them out of the body, but it doesn't do that alone. So if we look at what the requirements for resistance to metals and effective detoxification, meaning not only resistance but shuttling them out, you need healthy levels of glutathione in the cells. You need activity of an enzyme. It's called a phase 2 detoxification enzyme. It's called glutathione S transferase. This is an enzyme that's responsible for prying the mercury off the cellular proteins and linking it together with the glutathione. So now those two parts work. You have the glutathione, you had the glutathione transferase. Now you have a mercury glutathione conjugate in the cell. Now you got to get it out of the body. Now at the cell membrane, you've got active transport proteins. They're called multi-drug resistance proteins, and they push that mercury glutathione complex out of the cell and into the blood. From there, you've got another one at the liver, a similar one that pulls it from the blood into the liver, and another one that dumps it from the liver into the bile tract to go into the small intestine. You've also got some of these transport proteins in the blood, at the intestinal walls, pulling from the blood into the intestines, and you've got them in the kidneys as well. So you have to have all three parts of this going. As I may have mentioned before, in cell lines where they find high resistance to metals, they have all of these parts working well. And if they knock any one of them out, then the cells are no longer resistant to the metal. So in our approach to detoxification, we want to optimize top to bottom this detoxification system and this transport chain so that you are pulling mercury away from the sensitive proteins that it's bound to and getting it out of the body. Taking oral glutathione in a capsule is very inefficient because your peptidases break down the glutathione into its amino acids. It's made up of glutamate, glycine, and cysteine, and those are broken up in the gut. And so those aren't very well absorbed. IVs are very expensive, and they also don't travel well from the blood into the cells. Plus you have to go, and do the IV. So you're left with either precursors, and whey protein I think is probably the best precursor, though at the same time you need to upregulate the activity of the synthesis enzymes that are making it from the precursors. And so when we talk about upregulating the enzyme system using plant chemicals, we'll get more into that. The other thing that we use a lot, which is a little bit more specialized, is liposomal delivery of glutathione. Here you're using
Ah.
phosphatidylcholine to create these little bubbles that their shell is virtually identical to your cell membranes, and they're absorbed like tiny emulsified fats in the GI tract. Or when you make them like we do, and you're making them at about 100 nanometers, very, very small, you can absorb them right through the oral cavity. So this is probably the only way to directly get glutathione right into the system. And at the same time, you're also bringing in phosphatidylcholine, which has its own therapeutic benefits by helping to repair the cell membranes. And the cell membranes are very highly damaged by metals and the free radical cascades that are catalyzed by them. So we use a lot of this liposomal glutathione. We've recently taken on the manufacturing of that and make a very, very small, high integrity liposome. But aside from liposomes, whey protein is my favorite way to get those precursors into the body. When I talked about the glutathione system, and I'm very specific that it's not just glutathione, but it's all these enzymes and proteins that work around them. So one is this glutathione S transferase I talked about. The other one is the glutathione synthetase and the gamma glutamyl cysteine ligase. So you've got a couple enzymes linking together those amino acids. So this is a beautiful part of the science called phytogenomics. Phyto meaning plants and genomics meaning genes. And what we're finding is that genes are not always, the old school was that if you have a gene for it, you're using it. But the new school is you can have the gene but not express it at all. So what are triggers to start expressing these genes? And we're finding that there's whole families of genes that can be upregulated together. There's a protein out in the cytoplasm called the NRF2 protein, and it's held in place there by another protein called the KEAP1. And when certain chemical triggers hit it, it translocates into the nucleus. And when it does so, a whole family of genes that have what are called a promoter region. It's a way to turn on families of genes. And it's called the antioxidant response element. And this whole family of genes turns on at once. And these are genes that code for production of intracellular antioxidants as well as production of these phase 2 enzymes like glutathione S transferase and production of these phase 3 proteins for transport. So you're helping turn up the whole system at once. And what are the things that trigger this? Well, a lot of these things that we consider superfoods. So the main family of food chemicals that do this, or plant chemicals, are the polyphenolic antioxidants like you would find in green tea extract or pine bark extract. The one we use the most is called haritaki. We've got a blend called Clearway Cofactors where we bring together what we think are the best polyphenolics for doing this. And the other side of it are sulfur-based chemicals. So, Dr. Mercola, tell me, how many times have you heard or know personally that garlic is good for mercury detoxification?
Yeah, it's widely held.
Widely held, right? And is it also widely said that that's because it's a sulfur molecule and thus a chelator?
Well, I don't know if it's a direct chelator as it is providing, the source of sulfur for the glutathione system.
Well, often you'll hear people say that. They'll say, yeah, it's a chelator, or the crucifer family. You're a little bit more hip to this, and so you say, well, it's the sulfur's going in there for other reasons. It's not a direct chelator. But a lot of people were under the impression that it was a chelator because of how it acted. Well, it turns out that these molecules, these kind of sulfur molecules, are triggers for this translocation of the NRF2 protein into the cell. And thus, they're triggering an upregulation of the glutathione system. You are the chelator. The glutathione system is the chelator. These sulfur compounds upregulate that. These polyphenols upregulate that. And so that's the way that these things work. So you would want to use the whey protein in conjunction with some of these polyphenolic antioxidants, or with some of these, with the crucifer family or garlic. And then you would get the enzyme up as well as bringing in the precursors. The best thing for upregulating the enzyme system is not actually allicin. some disulfides that come out in the oil. If you go find garlic oil, that's good for it, even though it has a very low allicin content. The allicin is more of the antimicrobial and probably the anti-atherosclerotic effect. So it's a different game when you get to detoxification. You can find these things called garlic oil pills that are just as good as any other form of garlic for, or maybe even better for upregulating that part of the detoxification system.
Do the garlic oil pills also impart that odor that one
They
typically
do.
has from?
It is the odor itself that does the work. So deodorized garlic ain't going to help you.
All right, that's another key pearl.
And that's another reason we use polyphenolics more.
Okay, but either could work.
Yeah, either could work. You know, what we found is that people were responding better to the polyphenolics than the broccoli extracts like sulforaphane or the garlic. And I think any of these things, it's a funny kind of hormetic effect. There's actually a slight irritation to the cell that provokes the reaction, and there's actually some free radical reactions at the site of this NRF2 protein that provoke it to go into the cell. So how can we provoke this reaction without irritating the body much? And often these people are highly chemical sensitive, and we just found the polyphenolics to do the job and be a little bit more gentle for the very mercury poisoned person, though the sulfur compounds sometimes pack more punch. This whole defense system that we're talking about is part of the antioxidant system. And so you need a lot of electron donors in there feeding into the system, and you're going to transfer those electrons into the glutathione. As you're using the glutathione up as an antioxidant, it's getting oxidized. It needs to be re-reduced. You need to feed this stuff into the system. That's the use of vitamin C, constantly bringing electrons into the system, as well as its immune effects, building up the immune system. So vitamin C is an integral part of that, but you're not going to do it with vitamin C alone. That's a very myopic scene. But it is a strong player. It's always there. It should be, one of your main pawns in this game. Then you look at lipoic acid. There's a lot of controversy around how lipoic acid works. Well, the literature is very clear on it, but some of the old mythology is more that it's acting directly as a chelator, and it may act to some degree as a chelator. But lipoic acid is a very potent upregulator of the glutathione system, and specifically R-lipoate. So with alpha lipoic acid, you've got two forms. You've got S-lipoic acid and R-lipoic acid. And these are like amino acids where you've got D amino acids and L amino acids, and L is the only one that fits into the biochemistry, and D does not. And so S-lipoate does not fit into the biochemistry. I mean, it's used, it can act as an antioxidant in the body, it can do some functions, but it can't upregulate the glutathione system. Only the R-lipoate fits into this NRF2 mechanism to upregulate the glutathione system. That's why we have a liposome that's a mixture of vitamin C and R-lipoic acid. You can take high doses of this without running into bowel tolerance, and very effective delivery of that lipoic acid. So that's the sulfur chemical that we use the most. Now, the other thing that you talked about is oxidative therapies, and this at first seems like quite a paradox. How do oxidative therapies help this antioxidant system? So ozone is the best of the antioxidant systems. Now, remember I said to upregulate the glutathione system, you need to create this little reaction where you translocate the NRF2 protein into the nucleus. Now, the NRF2 protein is held in place by the KEAP1 protein. The KEAP1 protein is a dithiol, and it actually gets oxidized to a disulfide, and when that happens, it lets go of the NRF2 and it can move into the nucleus. So that's the irony, is these things that we think of as antioxidants, like pine bark extract, green tea extract, the polyphenols from the Ayurvedic system that we use, actually can catalyze these little free radical reactions that cause the NRF2 protein to be transported. But also the oxidants, the pro-oxidants from the ozone can do exactly the same thing. They cause exactly the same upregulation of the system that these things that we call antioxidants do. And so on the other side, you have the pro-oxidants. And really, there is a lot of emerging research on how overuse of antioxidants can get you into trouble. It really can lead you down more cancer-like paths if you don't have the whole system balanced. That's why I really like these plant-based antioxidants, because they've got pro-oxidative and antioxidative character. You look at something like CoQ10, that's pro-oxidative and antioxidative, depending upon whether it's ubiquinone or ubiquinol. And both of these things are essential in the body. And so I like to balance the antioxidant approaches with some of the pro-oxidant approaches. Chlorella is working on the system from the gut aspect. And it's what is called a binder, meaning that when metals are in the gut, this will hold on to them so you don't, two things. One is so that you don't absorb them or reabsorb them. A lot of metals that come out in the bile are then reabsorbed. So one is to prevent that absorption, but the two is to hold it away from the epithelia of the intestines that can become so irritated by metals there. And so you're preventing this irritation, preventing this inflammation. So when we talked about the aspects of the cell that are necessary, or the aspects of the glutathione that are system that are necessary, we talked about glutathione. We talked about the enzymes, including enzymes for production of glutathione and enzymes for glutathione as transferase, this linking enzyme. Now we're going to talk about the transport protein. We talked about it getting out of the cell, and we talked about it making its way from the cell through the blood to the liver, and through the liver into the small intestine. But we didn't talk about how the whole system gets dysregulated at a GI tract level. Specifically, when you have inflammation in the gut, you actually shut those doors into the gut, going from the liver into the gut and directly from the blood into the gut. What happens then? You back up that whole flow of traffic coming from the cells, and the whole mechanism necessarily has to turn down. Whenever you back things up, in any enzyme reaction, if you can't remove the product of that reaction, it slows down the enzyme. It's called product inhibition of the enzyme. So if you stop that movement into the gut, you stop the whole system. The easiest way to stop that movement is inflammation, caused often by all the metals that are in there. And in fact, if the metals build up, this is the same thing as the enzyme system. If the metals build up around the transport proteins, you stop that movement of the metals through those transport proteins. So again, you're stopping the traffic flow. You're creating a traffic jam. So this brings me back to what I think is a grossly underestimated understanding in the effect of dental amalgam. People think about all the mercury that they get into the system, but they're not thinking about all this mercury, this corrosion product coming off the amalgams that are going through the gut. These corrosion products create an irritation on the lining of the gut that stop these transport proteins, just like I said. So you've got one form of mercury going as a vapor right into the system and going into systemic circulation, and you've got another form going and blocking the door out of the body. That is the profound problem with the dental amalgam. And at the same time, it's dysregulating the immune system. You know well that 60 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut, and a lot of that is in the form of these dendritic cells that are reaching into the lumen of the gut and feeling the contents, and they're looking for something to cause the alarm. And what they're looking for is a poison and an invader. And the poison can be the mercury, the invader can be the dysbiosis that is created because the mercury selects, especially when you have amalgams, it selects for certain bacteria and certain organisms that can live in there. So the immune system can react to all this and create this hyperinflammatory state all the time. It's going to turn down the whole detox system as well as create all of these potential immune problems. So the role then of the binder, as I see it, is to pull all of this metal away from the walls of the intestine and away from these transport proteins. And doing so, it is facilitating the active participation of the whole detox system by pulling away that traffic jam so everything can then drain correctly. And so often people don't really understand, I think, the mechanisms of the binders. And then in our system, we developed a sort of, super binder, and these are silica particles that have covalently bound thiol groups on them. And these little particles are saturated with thiol groups. So when they go through the gut, they're very powerful at pulling all these metals away and creating this gradient away from the transport proteins and away from the walls of the intestines so that the whole system can work as it's supposed to. I don't know exactly where all of it is stored, but I think it is coating that whole intestinal area. In fact, it's a little complicated to get into it, but in some work that was done in Germany where they compared people with amalgams to people who got their amalgams taken out, they saw these changes that happened in the system over time, and you can see when that source of mercury going through the gut all the time was taken away, the body more effectively released mercury out of its cells. It took away this traffic jam that was moving all the way up from these release areas all the way up through the body. So I think there's a number of things that it's doing, a number of places it's depositing in the gut, and they do find very high levels in the gut.
Terrific. So I'm wondering if you could address potentially another urban myth on chlorella specifically, in that some people with testing companies have propagated, which tends to be that chlorella causes more harm than good because it's a source of mercury and actually deposits mercury back into the system.
That's absurd.
I know, but is that your understanding of their argument? Because there are some people who disagree with the use of chlorella who are involved in mercury detox.
Yeah, I've heard some people disagree with it. I've heard Huggins disagree with it, and he doesn't like anything from the sea, and he sees everything from the sea as a source of metals. But I've had a number of the chlorellas here in my lab and measured them myself. Their levels were incredibly low, and it was the form of inorganic mercury, which is not absorbed through the gut very well, if at all. And they were bound very tightly to the chlorella. It was about a part per billion. And again, it wasn't the methyl mercury, which you'd be able to maybe get off and absorb. It was all the inorganic mercury. So I completely don't buy chlorella as a source of mercury. Anything that promotes detoxification has to be used with care. And for our products, you don't. They're very potent, so you don't have a lot of running room. You have to down the dose, start at low doses, and work your way up as you're successively taking layer after layer out. With the chlorella, you've got more running room. Somebody who hasn't done detoxification shouldn't go into taking 50 to 70 pills per day. They will provoke too strong of a detoxification reaction. But aside from that getting to those very high doses too quickly, I can't see any issue with chlorella. In fact, I have people use it in conjunction with our products just to have a broader spread of some of the more gentler, so they can continuously take binding compounds throughout the day.
Well, you've really shed some important light on this very confusing topic. Are there any other parts of your protocol or legends that you've encountered that you'd like to address that they think that are really important parts of the mercury detoxification protocol?
Well, let's see. What do we want to? Definitely diet, but this isn't myth. I mean, I'm just going to reiterate what you say a lot. But the key, let me just bring up a crossover here between type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance in general, things like metabolic syndrome, and how they cross over into metals toxicity. These high, and this then moves into these high starch diets, high fructose corn syrup, lots of processed white foods. These are creating oxidative stress in the body because they're not supporting your antioxidant system, and they're overdoing your insulin system. Insulin receptors are dithiols, so they get destroyed by oxidative stress, and they get destroyed by metals binding to them, or they get inactivated. Insulin is also a thiol, and the insulin molecules under oxidative stress or metal catalyzed oxidative problems will polymerize. So you've got these polymers of insulin that can't be effectively used, and you've got these inactivated insulin receptors. So having a very robust antioxidant system and having a low carbohydrate diet is essential for repairing a lot of that so you can effectively use insulin. And a lot of these same things that we're using for detoxification, like glutathione and specifically lipoic acid, are used for repairing these insulin molecules. So getting into this repair stage necessarily means getting away from these high starch diets. You need good quality proteins and good quality fats. The proteins to repair all these mangled proteins and to provide sulfur, and the fats to help repair all of these cell membranes. And you got to stay away from all that use of carbohydrate. You look at, like in Germany, lipoic acid is used as a prescription for type 2 diabetes, where they'll do short-term high-dose lipoic acid. What do we know about high-dose lipoic acid? It's upregulating all of that antioxidant and chemo protection system. That's a good way to look at the systems that I'm talking about, is chemo protection systems, because it's far beyond just metals. But that's the crossover here. These same systems that are getting rid of the metals are also protecting our insulin receptors.
Suggest a way to integrate oxidative therapies into a detoxification protocol.
Absolutely. They've seen in exercise work that these short oxidative bursts make the system more efficient, and some of it is by upregulating the antioxidant systems and having a proper balance between oxidative and antioxidative. I'll often say that these two things have to be very well compartmentalized. One of the central failures under a toxicity situation is where the mitochondria start to break down. And the mitochondria are creating these very high oxidative states, but they're keeping them very well contained, and they're keeping them separated from very reducing states that are right next to them. And so when the integrity of that system's ability to separate those two things falls apart, you're suddenly spewing free radicals recklessly around. So these short oxidative bursts bring a robustness to the system, and they trigger the correct expression of your antioxidant system. So I think when you're integrating these two things, the things to keep in mind are not to do them at the same time. In fact, I saw somebody talk about a paper in which people did not get the benefits of they didn't get all the benefits of exercise if they took vitamin C right before they exercised.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
So you need that little respirative oxidative burst, and then when you're recovering, then you can take your antioxidants. And in fact, if you look at glutathione profiles during exercise, you see they go down during the exercise as they're consumed, and then in the post-exercise phase, they come back up and go above baseline as they respond to that. So it's important to have these little bursts. Now, if the system, the antioxidant system, has no integrity to it, if it's really broken down, you'll find these people can't exercise. They feel terrible when they exercise because those free radical bursts are not under control. So for those really sick people, you might want to start with doing these other phytotherapies, these plant-based therapies that restore some integrity, and then work in the oxidative stuff. But again, don't go taking your glutathione right before you do your ozone work or your peroxide work or your exercise. Have these things compartmentalized. And when we set up protocols, we always set up on and off periods. So typically you'll do 5 days on, maybe Monday through Friday, and then you'll do Saturday and Sunday off. maybe it's best to do the oxidative therapies in your days off and the antioxidative therapies, taking your glutathione and such, on your days on. At the very least, you have to separate them in the day. Maybe take your antioxidants early and do oxidative therapy later, or vice versa. So you just need to compartmentalize these different approaches. And I work with some of the people in the ozone world, and I do hope to start. We've all talked about starting to do research together and really promote all of this and figure out what the best ways to integrate these things are. But it's still a little early. The reason it takes a while is that only certain things ever get funded. And so a guy like me, I pour through the literature, I know how to read the literature, and I can garner stuff that's been done and start, using that to put together these systems, and then we can test them in a clinical setting. But there's a lot more good biochemists getting involved in this now. They're more friendly to looking at these integrative approaches. And God, I can't believe how much research I found on plant chemicals and their ability to upregulate different aspects of the biochemistry. So I think we're really going to make a lot of jumps.
Sounds terrific. So for those who have been motivated to learn more about this topic, what type of resources can you recommend? Do you have a website? Have you written books? Or
everybody wants me to read to write a book, but I've been so buried in running the company and developing new protocols, developing new products that it has not been forthcoming yet. But you can go to our website, which is quicksilverscientific.com. In the clinical section, we've got some sections for the environmental work. There's some educational material in the environmental work, in the environmental side. But in the clinical side, there's more material about this, and we're constantly posting more stuff there. We have a clinician's corner that is really for our clinicians using our products, and that's where the largest amount of the materials are. But as we go here, we're going to be posting more and more material out into the public side of it, and hopefully through people like you, we can start bringing out more of these protocols and more of these systems out to the public, and bringing more of this educational material out to the public.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you, and appreciate all you're doing.
You're welcome. Oh, and there's also a clinician locator out on the website, so you can find people in your area that are working with our products. Or if you have a naturopath or an integrative MD or osteopath that you like working with, encourage them to get in touch with us. We have a lot of education programs so that we can educate your doctor on how to use these products and systems as well.
Perfect.